Look at the prices for these two cosmetology programs. One costs $6,250, the other costs over $24,000. Both of these schools are in the exact same state. Both of them teach the exact same state-mandated curriculum, and both prepare their students to pass the exact same state licensing exam. The massive price gap has nothing to do with state law. The difference is federal architecture. The $24,000 program is tethered to the Title IV federal higher education system. The $6,000 program operates entirely outside of it. To legally accept federal student aid, a school has to build out the infrastructure of a small college. They must maintain institutional accreditation, pay for regular compliance audits, and generate continuous financial reporting. All of that overhead gets priced into the tuition. Federal higher education subsidies are designed to make training more affordable. But when you require basic occupational training to happen inside a simulated college environment to access those subsidies, you artificially inflate the baseline price of entry. This market is driven by a singular policy assumption: the idea that a person learning a trade must be processed through the administrative machinery of higher education. This flowchart shows how the current legal architecture forces that outcome. A student enters an accredited Title IV school. The federal government sends aid directly to that school, which then credits the student's account. The student then sits through a mandatory program that often exceeds 1,500 clock hours. That 1,500-hour block bundles two entirely distinct, contradictory things into one expensive package: basic public health and sanitation rules alongside complex, subjective trade artistry. The federal government cannot fix this by issuing an executive order to relabel existing Pell Grants as workforce aid. The constraints are written into the statute. You have to dismantle the flowchart itself. To restructure this market, policymakers must pull training out of the Department of Education's jurisdiction and move it into the Department of Labor. Unbundling the beauty license into its component parts is the most direct way to align federal spending with the actual practical requirements of the job. If you look at state statutes, cosmetology boards do not exist to grade the artistic quality of a haircut. Their legal mandate is strictly limited to health, sanitation, safety, and fraud prevention. Those regulations are responses to real biological hazards. When the CDC investigated an outbreak of infections at California nail salons, they found mycobacteria multiplying in 29 out of 30 whirlpool footbaths they sampled. In a separate New Mexico spa investigation, the CDC linked cases of HIV transmission to unlicensed microneedling procedures. Infection control and chemical safety are serious, life-or-death regulatory functions. Emergency medical training operates on a very similar logic. EMT preparation is not structured as a long-term academic degree. It is designed as a highly focused safety and competency credential. Cosmetology presents an EMT-type problem. The initial requirement should be a short, heavily tested safety credential, overseen directly by state health authorities. If the state's only legitimate interest is preventing infection, it only needs to administer a short, rigorous public health gate. The remaining majority of a 1,500-hour school mandate cannot be justified by safety alone. That leaves the rest of the required hours. This is where students learn the actual mechanics of cutting hair, mixing color, managing schedules, and driving retail sales, the skills required to survive in a commercial salon. Historically and functionally, those specific trade skills are best acquired through continuous, supervised practice in a live environment, not by sitting through static classroom lectures. This is exactly how the construction and HVAC industries train hundreds of thousands of active workers. They rely on work-based earn-and-learn models. The Department of Labor's registered apprenticeship system is built for this. Trainees earn wages while they learn on the job. The cost of skill development shifts away from federal grants and onto employer payrolls, where the economic value is actually being generated. This is an active reality today. States like Washington and Maryland already maintain legal beauty apprenticeship pathways within regulatory frameworks. By trapping business and artistry training inside a tuition-charging institution, the current system actively prevents students from earning wages during the exact period they are developing their professional skills. Scaling this unbundled, apprentice-based system nationally hits an immediate legislative barrier: the constraints written into the Higher Education Act. For non-degree programs, the law sets strict statutory floors. A program must run a minimum of 15 weeks and 600 clock hours to qualify for Pell. A short EMT-style sanitation module is legally barred from standard Pell funding because it is simply too short. There is a separate federal vehicle designed explicitly to bypass these institutional constraints, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. WIOA uses a tool called the Individual Training Account. ITAs are built around participant choice and labor market relevance, and the statute explicitly allows these funds to be used for registered apprenticeship training. Title IV is statutorily hostile to short-term, competency-driven credentials. Shifting to WIOA is the most legally viable path to finance a modern trade pipeline. In the Title IV system, federal aid rarely touches the student. Money flows directly from the government to the institution's bank account, but the WIOA ITA system changes the routing. The voucher is controlled by the student, who directs it to an approved training provider. When students control a strictly capped grant and see the provider's exact published price upfront, their incentives change. They are forced to evaluate the cost directly, turning them into price-sensitive consumers. With a maximum Pell Grant sitting at roughly $7,400, a similarly capped workforce grant could entirely cover the $6,200 cost of the Louisville Beauty Academy. It finances completion without leaving a massive gap for the student to cover with loans. To expose actual market prices and stop the cycle of endless student debt, you have to decouple federal aid from institutional accreditation. This chart maps the proposed split model architecture. The student qualifies for a workforce grant, completes a short state-approved safety and sanitation module, and passes a public health exam. They receive an apprentice license, enter a paid salon apprenticeship, and finally earn their full trade credential. The state manages the health exam, while the federal workforce system financing the training. Any system that uses participant-controlled vouchers carries inherent risk. Without oversight, the resulting influx of cash can easily be exploited by predatory pop-up providers. This requires strict fraud safeguards built into the pilot. The design mandates milestone disbursements, mandatory provider bonds, and a statewide data system matching attendance with testing vendors. Paying for verified step-by-step progress, rather than issuing massive upfront federal payouts to institutions, creates a safer financial market for both the taxpayer and the student. The debate over beauty licensing reveals a much deeper structural problem with how occupational entry is governed in America. State public protection mandates have been captured by federal financing rules. Not every practical career path requires the immense bureaucratic overhead or the resulting debt profile of an accredited college degree. By splitting the model, prices drop, zero loan pathways open up through paid work, and public health outcomes improve because the safety credential receives dedicated, rigorous oversight. Executing this requires explicit state legislative reform and targeted federal WIOA pilots. You cannot achieve this through administrative tinkering with the Higher Education Act. Real workforce development requires a structural shift. It requires treating people learning a trade like workers.